So good morning. I borrowed the title of this presentation, Energy Efficiency for Whom, from Professor Catherine Grossman that Nora mentioned earlier on. So yes, my name is Clotilde. I'm actually the only speaker who is not a university professor, so I'm a bit stressed. I'm more of a practitioner. I've been working for 15 years now in the Brussels EU policy sphere. Currently, I work for FEANTSA, which is a European Federation of National Organizations working with the homeless. What does it mean? It means that all members have the common goal of fighting and ending homelessness. They are mainly service provider, but we also have cities, foundation, and other kind of organization. So yes, big disclaimer, I'm not a university professor. I'm not going to be very conceptual, but I still hope it will be interesting for you. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. Just so to warn you what's coming up right now, I'll try to present a bit of a perspective at a crossroad of housing and the just transition. I'll say a few words on the background and the situation of housing inequalities. It will be short because Nora covered it much better than I could. And then my main part will be the third part on policy and social implications. So a bit of background. So I work for FEANTSA since 2018 when I was hired to actually work on housing solutions, because we say that homelessness is never only a housing problem, but it is always also about housing. So we created this initiative together with partner organization Fondation Abbé Pierre in France, Housing Europe, which is a European network for social housing, and Habitat for Humanity International now has joined the partnership. So we created this partnership to together work to identify housing solution for people locked out of the housing market. One of our key achievements is a publication called 50 out-of-the-box housing solution. You can find it on Google. And so what happened is I was hired for that. I worked on that. And doing that, I started to work actually on vacant housing mobilization, renovation. And it was in 2018, 2019. And then 2020, the Green Deal happened. And so you have to know that before the Green Deal in 2010, when I started my career in Brussels, we had what we called the Europe 2020 strategy, which was a 10-year strategy for growth at European level. And it had a mix of objectives, 5 objectives, looking at employment, education, climate emission reduction, and others. And so in 2020, everything changed, and everything was about climate. And all other objectives would go under this overarching Green Deal. And so I started to look at how does it fit in with housing and the social impact of this Green Deal. I think we were very early on at FEANTSA, and we presented quite a unique voice back then. Now more and more people are looking into that, and more green organizations as well are looking at the social impact, because they realize that basically the transition will not be possible if it's not a fair one. But back then, FEANTSA was one of the first, I think, in the EU bubble. So just a few slides on the political background. Maybe you know all of this already, but basically Green Deal 2020, EU Climate Law 2021, the objective is a climate target of at least 55% reduction of net emission, and everything must change. So transport, agriculture, industry, housing. How can we become carbon neutral? And what role can the EU bring to trigger this change? And so I don't know if you realize, but this is really huge. And actually, my boss thinks it's on purpose that we are so much synced into the policy change that we can't really respond quickly enough. So FEANTSA, we are a homelessness organization working also on housing, but we don't have the expertise to face the Green Deal completely. So we try to look in particular at some aspect of the Green Deal. One part of the Green Deal is the Fit for 55 package, and within the Fit for 55 55 package, you have many initiatives. I stop here just to say if I speak too quickly or if you don't understand my French accent or if you have a question, please raise your hand so we can have an interaction. So Fit for 55 includes some of the initiative we are following: the emission trading scheme, energy efficiency directive, energy performance of building directive, that's actually the one I followed most, and a social climate fund. Okay, so 2020 also, we had what was called the renovation wave, which is a strategy for renovation, because basically buildings are responsible for 36% of carbon emission in the EU. So the building sector is really under the radar now to change and be transformed according to Green Deal objective. And so 2020 renovation wave strategy, this is the conclusion. So in 10 years, so it's 2030, so now it's 7 years away from now. The buildings of Europe will look remarkably different. Building will be microcosm of more resilient, greener, and digitalized society, operating in a circular system by reducing energy need, waste generation, and emission at every point, and reusing what is needed. Their roof and walls will increase the green surface of our city and improve the urban climate and biodiversity. Blah, blah, blah. And you have to know, well, my perspective is I work for a homelessness organization, okay? So we look at people, like back then we estimated 700,000 people who are homeless. And then the commission come and say, well, in 10 years, new world, new human being, this is what we're going to. I wasn't sure if I should laugh or cry when I read that, really. So, which leads me to tell you a bit about housing inequalities. And going back to the previous slide, there is this American philosopher that you might know, Dallas Willard, who says that reality is what you run into when you're wrong. And that's what I feel when I think one day people will realize how the ideology designed from the tower of the European Commission is far from the reality. So what do we mean by housing inequalities? You had a lecture about that for 1 hour and a half. So please give me some keywords. What are housing inequalities for you? Come on, otherwise I feel you really don't care about what I say. Thank you. Affordability, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, quality, yeah. Yeah, many of those and more. So I'll have a quick look at those. Basically, I based those few slides on a report by Eurofond. So if you want to know more at housing inequality from a bit of a European and political perspective, I recommend this report, which is very recent, May 2023. Eurofond is the European agency for living and working condition. Basically, they are doing research on living and working condition. And for them, housing inequalities, but I think from a conceptual perspective, from what Nora said, it's more housing precarity, but it match 4 elements. So housing exclusion, access to housing, security of housing, the stability of this housing, adequacy, quality, and affordability, so impact of the housing on disposable income. So I'll go through those briefly and then go into the core of what I want to say. So housing exclusion, if you want to know more about it, on 5th of September, FEANTSA is releasing its 8th overview of housing exclusion. It's my colleague Nicolas Orva working on that. So every year now, FEANTSA carries out an analysis of national statistics, official data, and mix it with case study to better understand the European overview of housing exclusion. What my colleague says is that, as you can guess, measuring housing exclusion is extremely difficult because you don't have data available. When you do have it, it's often incomplete and absolutely incomparable in between what is collected in Germany, in Slovenia, in Spain, etc. However, Nicola does a great job at looking at those and also European statistics and present trends based, on in particular on this, which is actually, I think I can say quite well known now. It's a FEANTSA developed categorization of what is homelessness and housing exclusion. So when we speak about homelessness, we don't speak only about rough sleeping, but about many other kind of housing instability, housing inadequacy. So you can see we divide it into several categories: rooflessness, houselessness, insecurity, and inadequate housing. Yeah. So housing adequacy, you mentioned the quality of housing. Nicola says that basically to see what is unfit housing, you have to look at the consequence of the housing. So whether it's on education, health, mental health, economic and material restriction. And I really liked what Nora said in terms of overcrowding, because we often use overcrowding, but I didn't understand the why, and that was very interesting. So according to the European Union Agency for Statistics, it's about 4% of the European population. So more than 19 million people who were in a situation of severe housing deprivation in 2020. I'll pass on those. Yeah, one element, I think it's interesting. Working on energy poverty, I came across this organization called the Forum for Electrical Domestic Safety, which bring together fireman organization, victims of fire, and also the copper industry. And basically, they work together and clearly establish the link between fire risk, energy poverty, and adequate housing. So I think it's an interesting element to take into account. Housing security. So Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights speak of the right to housing through the right to an adequate standard of living. And later on, the UN General Comments on this right to adequate housing went on to bring in the element of security that is essential actually to have adequate housing. Why am I speaking about it? Because the Eurofund study I mentioned earlier presents the result of studies I did on many things, but among others, likelihood of needing to leave accommodation within the next 3 months because of being unable to afford it. And you can see that about 3% at EU level, 3% of the people think it is likely, and 3% think it is very likely. So total, it's about 6% of Europeans who believe that in the next 3 months they might have to leave their housing. I don't know if you realize what it is, but it's quite stressful. And I can't mention housing security without mentioning eviction. I'm not going to go into details because it's very complex, again, very difficult to compare. You have, for instance, a difference between the number of eviction notice given and the number of actual eviction happening. So it's a whole seminar just in itself, and I'm not specialized into that, but I thought I should mention it. Housing affordability as well. Sorry, Nora mentioned it. So housing affordability as how much in relation to disposable income that is measured through the housing cost overburden rate. So it's when you spend more than 40% of your income on housing. And you can see the gap that Nora mentioned between tenants in yellow and owner in gray. Okay, this is where I start. So I'm not going to go into detail about that again, but I thought you should know that basically there are various tools to respond to housing inequalities. And the Council of Europe Development Bank did an interesting report called Bricks by Brick in 2017, where they present different kind of housing policies and their impact. And so basically, they divide response to housing inequalities in two sides. First, when you respond to the supply problem through financial instruments to either construct new housing or refurbish existing stock, or you respond to the demand side problem, typically through housing allowance. And I think it's interesting because there was an interesting article in the Financial Times yesterday, actually, about the housing situation in the UK, and they say that a big problem in housing now is really the supply side. And when you look at data, you see that actually since 2008, construction, here it's as a percentage of GDP, it's really collapsing. And I can speak of the French example. Sorry, because that's what you heard yesterday. But we see really at national level this investment in social housing and this investment in housing allowance. So in one side, we have a real homelessness crisis, and in the other, public disengagement. So here you can see the gray bar, basically it's 2015. And if you look at the blue one, it's 2008. And so you can see the drop basically in investment for almost every country apart from the Nordic, Scandinavian, basically. I think it's OECD who says that investment in housing development, public investment in housing development has more than halved since 2001. And going back to the Green Deal, what happened as well, we can observe, is that we really start to have a questioning of the built environment because of its responsibility in carbon emission. So we have new norms that I will speak about later, but also just in the narrative, we have a questioning, is building what we should be doing? And I was speaking with someone from a foundation telling me, actually shrinking cities, do we really have to invest there? Shouldn't we just let them die? And, in terms of carbon emission, so what I want to say, I have many questions. I'm presenting more questions than solution. So that leads me to the question of synergies and trade-off, as mentioned by Professor Erg Vorsat in 2012 in our work on building synergies between climate change and mitigation and the energy poverty alleviation. So what are synergies? Yeah? Great. I like that. Thank you. Okay. Do you want to say more about how it relates to SDGs? Yeah? Exactly. Exactly. Compromise. Okay. So exactly what you said. Synergy is the interaction or cooperation of two or more agents to produce a combined effect greater than the sum of their separate effect. Typical example, a lemon cake. If you have lemon, egg, and flour, it's not the same that if you get them all together. Trade-off is compromise, exactly what you said. So why does Diane Erg-Vorsat speak about it? Because she says that basically in environmental policy, we have different kind of tools available to us, and some of them will force us to trade off, and some of them will actually bring synergies. And she speaks of one which is carbon pricing. So I don't know if you're familiar with carbon pricing, but the idea is to reduce emission by increasing price of the fossil fuel that emits when they're burned. So are you aware of the recent change in terms of the emission trading scheme? Yes, can you raise your hand if you are? Okay, thank you. Why is it important, those who raise their hand? Why is carbon pricing important from a social justice perspective? Come on. It makes things expensive? Yes, it makes things expensive. Okay. Okay. So we already have an emission trading scheme, basically polluter payer principle. And the European Union has just passed a legislation, Rachel Guyet, you mentioned it yesterday, to extend the emission trading scheme, okay? So it will be extended to building and road transport. I'm not a specialist, please don't ask technical questions, but what it means is that you will have to pay more for heating and cooking and fuel who have strong carbon content. So basically heating with oil, gas, and the fuel for your car. Why is it important? Because it's the first time that actually the tax is going down to the household, not directly, but we can expect that the companies will increase their price to match the difference. We can also expect that there will be an indirect effect with other goods, such as food, who will increase due to this new tax. Basically, it's a tax on energy. The Polish Economic Institute estimates that such an extension would mean an average annual increase in energy expenditure for EU poorest household of 44% for transport and 50% for housing. So heating, cooking, fuel for vehicles. The price will increase, that I said. Okay, sorry, I repeated my slide. Two things. First, actually, we don't know anything about the impact. We don't know. And that's one of the things I find annoying in the Green Deal policy is that we have a lot of ideology, a lot of big principle and big objective. The reality is we don't know the social impact. An expert on carbon pricing, after this quote here, we know so little about price formation in the new ETS. It is equally possible that we will have very low price as well as very high ones. We don't know. So new ETS will start from 2027, except that the European Parliament introduced an emergency brake. So if prices are too high, it will be delayed by 1 year, 2028. Yeah. And so I said an increase of 44%. And here I want to stop a minute with you, because it doesn't mean anything for you and I, 44%. And I think, I don't know about you, but for me, working in Brussels now for 15 years, numbers lose their meaning, you know. So we said at FEANTSA we have 700,000 homeless people. And actually now new data say it's 895,000 people. What does it change for you and I? 100, 200,000 people, we don't see, we lose the reality. So I want to stop with you for a minute on a story. It's a story of the little red person on the front. So basically, it's me. And my parents went bankrupt. Their company, when I was 6, lost everything. I'm gonna try not to be emotional, but I thought I should add some personal elements to make it real. So I remember my childhood is remembering my dad every month saying, I don't know how we're gonna do it, you know, I don't know how we're gonna pay the bill. So when I hear today an increase of 45% on bills, I think of this little person and my dad. And so often we become disconnected from the reality. Like it's millions of people who don't know how they're going to make it at the end of the month. And now, from the tower of the European Commission, we're planning an increase, for the climate, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, of course it's important. But I think we should be stronger in the social ambition and in the social impact assessment, because it can't be. You can't continue like that. I mean, we cry then about the far right increase everywhere in Europe, but where do you think it comes from? People are so fed up about politicians being so far away from the reality. So this is why I care. Because carbon pricing, and it's been adopted now, it will happen, this ETS extension, and it has a disproportionate impact on lowest income group. Why? First, they spend a higher share of their total income on housing, on heating and transport and food. Secondly, they are already limiting their consumption to the minimum necessary. I mean, I'm lucky enough now, my husband and I, we work, we have a nice job in Brussels, and but I know so many people back in France, like already now they don't buy cheese because it's too expensive, and they don't take their car, and that's a reality they are experiencing now. Third point, wealthier households are able to afford upfront cost for energy retrofit, or to change a car, or to change their heating system. We mentioned heat pump yesterday. It's a great big new thing, heat pump. I could tell you a lot about my view on that, but I have a friend from the European Commission who told me, well, if they forbid a thermic car, I'll just buy a Tesla. And he wasn't nasty, it was just his reality. The problem is that those people take the decision for everyone else. So we heard as well yesterday about the Social Climate Fund. I'll try not to be too passionate because we're being told Social Climate Fund is the solution, the transition, hashtag just transition, because we have the Social Climate Fund. So actually, the ETS extension will generate revenue, and part of this revenue will be used to finance the Social Climate Fund. The Social Climate Fund will be used to finance temporary direct income support, so to help people deal with the impact of price increase through direct allowances. It will also support measures and investments for renovation. And I think it is also supposed to support SMEs. So it will change the world, really. Only problem, it's 65 billion from 2026 to 2032. So I think it's 6 years. So about 10 billion a year. Well, then national member states have to increase it. But basically from a ETS2, it will be 65 billion. So you might disagree, but for me, the Social Climate Fund is nothing else than a communication tool. It won't change anything. It just justifies the hashtag just transition. And it makes me so mad. Also, just in the design, isn't it crazy? So it is financed through the ETS extension. So basically, we're going to tax people, and then from the revenue we generate, we take 25% and we give it, to people back to say, oh, actually, here is the European Union, we are very social, and we're going to go through a just transition. Just for comparison, earlier this month, Germany announced that they will pass a 200 billion climate fund to finance decarbonization and building renovation. But I know it's not only that, it's also going to the industry. But just so 212 billion for Germany, 65 billion for everyone in Europe to share. It's just, my concern is that, of course, countries like Germany and France and maybe to some extent, like Scandinavian country and even Spain, Italy, they'll manage. But what about Central and Eastern Europe? How will the transition go there? So Frans Timmermans is the vice president of the European Commission, and he's in charge of the Green Deal. He just stepped down to go into Dutch politics, and he's been replaced by Marco Sefcovic. And that's one of his tweets, hashtag just transition. Social climate fund will help to insulate houses, install heat pump, buy an electric car. And I just really wonder, does he believe what he writes? Or I just don't know if it's a level of disconnection that he does believe it, or if it's cynicism so far away that he doesn't care, or he doesn't realize that we know it's not sufficient. So that was not the trade-off. Synergy, because there is a potential actually, and the Green Deal is here, so we have to be positive and see what can we do about it. So the synergy is in the deep energy efficiency in building. And that's what the renovation wave is about. And the idea is basically, so we need to reduce emission. We also need better independence toward Russian gas. So what do? We need to insulate, so we stop our dependency on fossil fuel. It will improve comfort, it will lower energy use, reduce health risk, and reduce carbon emission, as I said. How are we going to do that? Key element, key piece of legislation is the Energy Performance of Building Directive that was negotiated, let's say, in the past 2 years, and that's really is in the ultimate stage of negotiation right now. And what does this EPBD does? It introduces minimum energy performance standards. So we already had performance standard for new building, but now we go and introduce them for everyone in the residential environment, like your parents' home, your cousin, and yourself, if you have your own home. So it sounds great, really, but the problem is, again, reality. How are we going to finance that? And again, my perspectives from a homelessness organization, and Nora showed the data. House price for rent and for ownership has increased for the last 10 years. Homelessness has increased for the last, 15 years. How are we going to finance this dream to renovate the whole building stock? So we are often being told this renovation is great, it will be a win-win-win, economic, social, environmental win. But this win-win-win cannot be assumed. And the big question we have at FEANTSA is, where will the finance come? Don't say the social climate fund, it's supposed to do everything. So because, of course, owners, if they need to renovate, they will pass on the cost to the tenant. And it's not because they are big, nasty capitalist owners. It's because they must get the money from somewhere, and maybe they can't do otherwise. What about gentrification? That's a work of Catherine Grossman and Mangold and all that was mentioned by Stefan yesterday, looking at how major renovation programs have actually often led to population displacement. So we've been working a bit on that at FEANTSA. And so I just want to mention a research by the University of Ghent in Flanders. So it's on the ability of household to finance renovation. I should have written the name of the author. Sorry, I can send it if you're interested. And basically, they are looking at Flanders. So Flanders is a part of Belgium. It's the richest part of Belgium and one of the richest part of Europe, I think we can fairly say. And there, half of the homeowners cannot afford to finance renovation to the A standard. It's half of the homeowner. And among them, it's about 30% who cannot finance a renovation, even with a 0% loan. So it's just reality. So there are many work done on the financing of renovation. One idea is to finance the renovation through the energy saving. But as was mentioned yesterday, we have the rebound effect, where actually people who, let's say, are energy poor, if their house is well insulated, they will just enjoy the extra comfort and they will not decrease the temperature, they'll just enjoy the comfort. And so basically the whole financing of the renovation is going to be private debt. So the problem with that is that you yourself, if you think about buying a house now, you see how difficult it is to access to property. Well, imagine if you have to have an additional debt to renovate. It makes housing even further inaccessible. So yes, the hard question where I don't necessarily have an answer, financing, how do we finance this transition? So in France, we have a new legislation since January, French example again, on banning passoire thermique. That's to say the homes that are not efficient from an energy perspective. So you can't run them anymore, okay? But the problem with that is what's going to happen with those houses, you know, because actually, and here maybe not everybody at FEANTSA would agree with me, but actually owners, part of it, you know, they're not big corporate owners. They have the little flat, they are pensioners, and they don't have the mean to renovate. So what will happen, I think, so the price decrease, and those who already have a lot will be able to buy and renovate. And I think for me, this is a mechanism that will actually increase inequalities even further. With an immediate consequence, I don't have data to back that, but I think we can imagine a shrinking of the rental market because actually now the cheap housing is the one that is not energy efficient. So what impact will this have on lowest income group? And last point, what about the EPC reliability? So do you know what EPC is? So EPC is an energy performance certificate, okay? And this is a scale that is used to implement EPBD ambition. So your house is either A, very energy efficient, either B, C, D, E, F, G, that's really not efficient. The problem with this EPC scale is that it is actually not very reliable at all. We had an investigation this year in Belgium by some journalists who had the same dwelling assessed by different experts, and they got a different letter for each of the different experts that I assessed the building. So how do you want to have binding legislation imposed at European level using a scale that is actually not reliable at all? I think that's a big question. There are many other initiatives for the just transition. I'm not a specialist, but I can tell you what's coming up. So we have the decarbonization of heating. So with a ban slowly happening for the selling of gas heating, oil heating, and all of this happening more and more. So we had they tried to introduce it in Germany, and there was really a people uproar because basically the industry is really pushing so that we go toward heat pump. Okay. Problem with heat pump is, of course, it's very expensive to install. It's more expensive than gas heating. Second problem with heat pump is that the house needs to be super insulated for it to work properly. So we have the case in France again. We had investigation and where you can see heat pump installers that have pushed households to install heat pumps, selling the merits of the heat pump. But if the house is not properly insulated, then it's a real catastrophe because people can't heat their home as they used to be, and the bills are super expensive, more expensive than before. So when we speak about heat pump, we must speak about energy renovation, deep retrofit going together, and therefore it means it's completely unaffordable for most people. And you heard about the controversies around fossil fuel cars as well, and electric car. Yeah, and nature restoration law. So please don't ask questions about it because I haven't worked on it so much. Or not at all, actually. But what I know is that some housing organizations have been very careful with it, saying, actually it will make it more complicated to build. Some farmers say actually it will impact the price of food. So there are really hard questions. And what is really annoying is that when you try to ask those hard questions, you're kind of being cancelled, if I can say that. You're like, oh, you're against the nature. You can't ask that. You're against the nature. And so there was a big campaign on Twitter by the supporter of the nature restoration law, but they weren't responding to the real question, the hard question. They were saying, oh, people who oppose it are against nature. How can you do that now? There is an emergency. And this is the kind of thing that actually makes this debate so difficult, because I think we have to be able to look at the hard question and work them out together. So how can we ensure socially fair energy transition? I don't really have the response, but I can tell you a bit what we try to do at FEANTSA. And so I think first the key is to challenge the narrative of a fair transition. Not saying that it's not possible, but trying to see how can we make it possible, and that we don't stop at the hashtag just transition, that we really do look at how is this doable. From a housing perspective, it's clear for us at FEANTSA that we have to re-establish housing as what it is, and it's not a commodity. And we have to establish housing as a right. And what does it mean concretely? It means rent regulation, ban on renovation, that was mentioned several times yesterday, and a ban on electricity disconnection. That's what the Right to Energy Coalition, I don't know where Laila is trying to work on now through the reform of the electricity market directive. And for FEANTSA, we've been also trying to work so that the funding is targeted. I'm going to explain. This is a graph we are often shown by Renovate Europe, which is a campaign to say we need a renovation wave. And basically, they say we have huge amount of European funding for energy renovation of building. The problem, it's true, there is money available through the resilience and recovery package and other instruments. The problem is that it is not targeted towards those who need it most. So actually, those who need it most will not benefit from it unless it's targeted. That's what we see working on homelessness, that if you have a blanket policy, if it's not targeted, it's not those who need it most who will benefit from it. And I stopped there also for a second. I thought you could be interested by that. So Renovate Europe is a big campaign in Brussels at European level for the renovation wave, mandatory energy performance standard, etc. Do you know who is Renovate Europe? Who are the organizations involved? Please, guess, try. So I see, yeah? Sorry? Exactly. It's some of them. I didn't, I've just put those I knew most. Just transition hashtag. So I work for FEANTSA. I don't know if I should tell you this anecdote, but so I work for FEANTSA, a homelessness organization. And I was actually contacted by one of those inviting me for lunch so that we could speak about how important it was for FEANTSA to be involved in lobbying for mandatory energy performance standard because of the energy poor who will benefit so much from it. And so I asked him, but what is your interest in, energy poor really you work for? And so he again, I'm not sure if he's convinced that he's doing the right thing really sincerely, or if and he doesn't realize that actually it's for his company to have a huge market. I don't know. So, well, the situation I presented, the question is what do we do about it? And so we have to see it also as an opportunity, despite everything I've criticized, we have to see what can we make out of it. And so FEANTSA is trying to advocate for two main things in the framework of this renovation wave, EPBD, mandatory energy performance standard. And the first is to target the funding available toward low-income cold home. Because we're saying that's where the win-win is, because in doing so, if you renovate first worst performing building of low-income home, you have a big climate impact and a big social impact. And as funding is limited, that's where we have to go to. Second idea, is anybody aware of what is housing first? Okay. Do you want to explain?
That is based on taking the right to housing as a basic human right, and it starts from there. So to solve homelessness, you first secure them adequate housing and then take it from there to provide all the rest of the services that they need in order to reintegrate into society and basically start living normally again, which is, I'm a big fan.
And so is FEANTSA. And so basically before the theory of addressing homelessness was what they call the staircase model. So when you are homeless, first you have to deal with your addiction, maybe, I don't know, find employment, and then you could access housing. And housing first says the contrary. It says first you have to have housing, and from there you can deal with other problem. And so the idea here is to say, why don't we use the opportunity of the renovation wave to transform collective emergency accommodation into long-term housing solutions, so that we take people from the street directly into housing first. So those are the recommendations from FEANTSA. This is my last slide. Don't worry. So what is FEANTSA going to do politically? We're going to continue to work on the PBD, also looking at the decarbonization of heating and cooling. I think there is a big thing coming up with a heat pump frenzy. I'm not sure what's going to happen here, but I'm a bit worried to see those legislative ban for fossil fuel heating. And we're being told heat pump are the solution, but actually there is a big gap again between the theory and the reality, and I'm not sure what's going to happen here. So we will continue to challenge this narrative of a just transition because we believe a just transition is possible actually, but for it to happen, it has to be done right. And I think the key thing, if you have to remember one thing from what I said, is that what we would like at FEANTSA is to see social ambition, because at the moment we have climate ambition and a social hat or social communication campaign around it. But we really would like to have the social at the heart of the transition. And one of the things so we're going to do is to make this case for investment, to say actually being social has a positive impact both for the environment and the economy. And to do that, you must first target those who need it most. Yes, I think you heard it before, but basically what we are worried about is that the way the transition is happening now could actually really lead to a deepening of exclusion and housing exclusion, and in doing so be counterproductive and fail to bring the social accessibility for the policy change needed to reach the EU climate target. So to simplify, a yellow vest movement, like if the transition is not fair, it won't happen. Sorry, I am not good on timing. I'm not doing that very often, so I hope